Hello and welcome to Inspector Calls Finish in 5. As previously, it's a series of little videos, and the idea is that by looking at 5 key extracts, you get a good overview of the whole text and how it all links together. Now, for each extract that we're doing, we're starting with a brief overview of what's happened so far. We've got a reading of the extract and what happens in it, a dissection of why it's important, and a little bit of a summary about the aftermath of it as well, in terms of what happens as a result. So in terms of what's happened so far. So far in the play, we've had Burling, Sheila, Gerald and Mrs. Burling all interviewed by the inspector. Now, Mrs. Burling's interview, we learned that Eva Smith, heavily pregnant and desperately in need, had gone to the Brumley Women's Charity for support. She'd used the name Mrs. Burling and had lied about her circumstances before finally admitting that it wouldn't be right to marry the father of her child, who was still alive, and she didn't want to accept the stolen money he'd been giving her. Now, Mrs. Burling ridiculed her story, turned her away, and then learned from the inspector that the young man in question was Eric. Eric then returns to the house to face the inspector's questions, admitting that he met Eva in a bar while he was drunk. Now, in terms of what's in this extract, we learn here that Eric forced himself on Eva while he was drunk, but that also, when their paths crossed afterwards, they began some kind of relationship. When Eva Smith became pregnant, Eric offered to marry her, but she refused in order to protect him. Now watch out as we read this for Eric's views on women and sex, his self-centered worldview, and also the way that Eva Smith's moral, responsible and dignified behaviour contrasts very strongly and clearly with Eric's, and that's despite Mrs. Burling's earlier prejudices. So you went with her to her lodgings that night? Yes, I insisted, it seems. I'm not very clear about it. Afterwards, she told me she didn't want me to go in, but that, I've seen that state when a chap easily turns nasty, and I threatened to make a row. So she'll let you in? Yes, and that's when it happened. And I didn't even remember. It's the hellish thing. Oh my God, how stupid it all is. Eric, how could you? Sheila, take your mother along to the drawing room. But I want to... You heard what I said. Go on, Sybil. When did you meet her again? About a fortnight afterwards. By appointment? No, and I couldn't even remember her name or where she lived. It was all very vague, but I happened to see her again in the Palace Bar. More drinks? Yes, although that time I wasn't so bad. But you took her home again? Yes, this time we talked a bit. She told me something about herself, and I talked too, told her my name and what I did. And you made love again? Yes, I wasn't in love with her or anything. I liked her. She was pretty, a good sport. So you had to go to bed with her? Well, I'm old enough to be married, aren't I? And I'm not married, and I hate those fat old tarts around the town. The ones I see some of your respectable friends with. I don't want any of that talk from you. And I don't want it from either of you. Settle it afterwards. Did you arrange to see each other after that? Yes, and the next time after that, she told me she thought she was going to have a baby. She wasn't quite sure, and she was. Of course, she was very worried about it. Yes, so was I. I was a hell of a state about it. Did she suggest you ought to marry her? No, she didn't want me to marry her. So I didn't love her, and all that. In a way, she treated me as if I was a kid, though I was nearly as old as she was. In many ways, what Eric does to Eva is the worst of any of the Burlings. At least with Gerald, she had a choice. And that is exactly what Eric takes away from her. Now, Eric's clear that she didn't want me to go in to her lodgings, but that he threatened her because he was in that state when a chap easily turns nasty. Now, when it comes to what is strongly implied to be Eric's rape of Eva, Eric can't even bring himself to use the words. That's when it happened. How stupid it all is. Eric is even selfish enough to claim that the fact that he didn't even remember is the hellish thing, rather than his drunken rape of a vulnerable young woman, and not even being able to remember her name or where she lived. Alcohol, again, is a key feature, that recurring symbol of corruption and the damaging influence of Burling's generation. It's noticeable that, once again, there's a reference to having talked a bit. Eric listened to her, and she listened to him, which is something severely lacking elsewhere in the play. Now, Eric's defence for their relationship is even worse than Gerald's. This strange assertion that I wasn't in love with her or anything, but that I liked her. She was pretty and a good sport. Now, once again, Eva is defined simply by how attractive she is. Pretty. Again, also, there's a lack of seriousness, of understanding in how she's treated. She's just a bit of fun for Eric, a good sport. Eric, like Sheila, is childish. But that childishness, his lack of responsibility, results in him drunkenly raping someone that he gets pregnant and has to steal money to support. And it's exactly that childishness, that Eva Smith notices. And that's seen in her treating him as if he were a kid, even though they're almost the same age. Now, Eric's views of women are, as with Gerald, a bit of a problem. He hates these fat old tarts round the town, what Gerald earlier called these hard-eyed, dough-faced women. It's an irony in the play that these women are presumably as they are because of men like Eric, like Gerald, like Joe Megarty, possibly even like Burling. Eric is also almost entirely self-centred. Eva becomes pregnant, but Eric falls in a hell of a state. It's himself he focuses on. Now, in Eric's defence, the assertion that she didn't want to marry me suggests that he at least did the decent thing and asked, offered. However, the last thing that Eric takes away from Eva is, of course, her future. Her pregnancy isn't just something that happens now. It's something that has a much more profound and a much more long-lasting impact. So what comes next? Well, it's made clear that Eric was stealing money to support Eva, and she broke off contact with him at that point. In that sense, it's Eric's fault that Eva, heavily pregnant and with no means of support, ends up at the charity. It's Eric's fault that Eva, pregnant with his baby, should think to use his name to sound respectable. Now, Eric, with all this registering, is deeply distressed when he realises that she and his baby are dead, and he's quick to blame his mother for what's happened, although he later also accepts responsibility. And by the end of the play, he seems to be in a similar situation to Sheila in terms of understanding the collective responsibility. The inspector, when he leaves, blames Eric entirely accurately. Ultimately, he just used her for the end of a stupid drunken evening, as if she was an animal, a thing, not a person. But it's also, to be fair to Eric, partially due to his family context that he behaves in this way. Okay, don't forget, there are other resources out there, as ever, to help you revise. There's the recipe book, loads of good stuff in there, quotation cards, the Net English One YouTube channel with loads of videos on there about Inspector Calls, the daily quotation on the Net English Twitter feed. There's the text guide available from your teachers or from websites. Or, of course, there is that whole set of podcasts covering everything about the whole text. And that's available through your Academy website. Okay, and that's the end of our 5th extract from Inspector Calls. There is one more in this sequence, number 6, which is our last one. And hopefully I will see you in the video for that.